Welcome back to The Legal Brief, the show where we crush the various legal myths and misinformation surrounding various areas of the gun world. I'm your host, Adan Kraut, and today we're going to continue building on those basics by taking a look at the law that laid the foundation for how guns are currently regulated in the United States. That's the Gun Control Act of 1968.
The drive-by kit from RE Factor Tactical offers multi-mission capability for operating operationally from your vehicle. Whether it's to calm down your never-ending road rage, shut your stupid kids up, or actually using it properly, you decide the mission and load it up your way. Able to be detached with a quick pull of a tab, you can even take it with you for use outside the vehicle. Available in black, tan, and multicam, this mini kit is a great add-on to anyone's gear list. To get 10% off your entire order, click the link in the description to head over to refactortactical.com and use the code TGC10.
Before we get started today, I just want to let you guys know that I'm running for the NRA Board of Directors this coming year, and I need your help. For more information, check out adamkraut.com. After the National Firearms Act of 1934 was passed, it would only be 4 years before America saw another federal law regulating firearms. The Federal Firearms Act of 1938, or the FFA, required all manufacturers, importers, and people selling firearms to obtain licenses. The FFA is also where we see for the first time the concept of prohibited persons, and those are people who cannot possess firearms or ammunition. Much of the FFA was later rolled into the GCA when it was enacted. It was not until 1968 that there was any more major federal action taken to regulate firearms. The next instance occurred when Congress passed the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968. The Safe Streets Act notably increased the age to purchase a handgun to 21 and prohibited interstate transfers of handguns. That's transfers between two different states. Obviously, as you know today, it's okay for a federal firearms licensee, or an FFL, to send a handgun to another FFL in another state in order to transfer that gun to a resident of that state. In fact, it's required by law. But the Safe Streets Act was not the only legislation that affected firearms in 1968. In October of that year, President LBJ, or Lyndon B. Johnson, signed the Gun Control Act of 1968, or GCA, into law. The GCA was the foundation for most of the gun laws we have at the federal level that are still in place today, save for a few later additions which we'll cover in future episodes. Notably, the GCA put into law the idea of prohibited persons, which include individuals who are either under indictment or have been convicted of a crime punishable by more than 1 year imprisonment, fugitives from justice, unlawful users of marijuana or other narcotics, or have been adjudicated mentally defective or committed to a mental institution. This means those prohibited persons cannot ship, transport, or receive firearms and ammunition. While the idea of a prohibited person was originally found in the Federal Firearms Act, or FFA, the GCA expanded the category of persons who were prohibited. The GCA set the requirement for licenses to be engaged in the business of manufacturing, importing, and selling firearms. Remember, licenses originally appeared in the FFA. The Act also had a provision which allowed for licensed collectors for curios and relics, or CNRs. Interestingly enough, the GCA also made it unlawful to ship ammunition to anyone other than a licensee, which meant that there was no mail-order ammunition that we all know and love today. I don't know about you, but I love coming home to a nice big pile of ammunition waiting for me. Fortunately, as we'll talk about in the next episode, this provision was amended in 1986, which is why we can order ammunition through the mail today. The GCA is also where we see the implementation of serial numbers on firearms. Yeah, that didn't happen until 1968. The language from the law stated licensed importers and licensed manufacturers shall identify by means of a serial number engraved or cast on the receiver or the frame of the weapon in such a manner as the Secretary shall by regulations, blah blah blah. Basically, you had to put a serial number on the gun. Additionally, it became a violation of the law for any person to knowingly transport, ship, or receive in interstate or foreign commerce any firearm which had the importer's or manufacturer's serial number removed, obliterated, or altered. Perhaps most important is that the GCA gave the ability to people who were prohibited persons to obtain federal firearms relief. The Act actually allowed for an individual to petition the Secretary for relief from the disability. If the individual were to show to the Secretary's satisfaction that the circumstances regarding the conviction and the applicant's record and reputation were such that the applicant would not be likely to act in a manner dangerous to public safety and that the granting of relief would not be contrary to the public interest, they could actually obtain relief. In other words, if they had a finding in their favor, they would no longer be prohibited. While this provision still exists today, Congress every year since the early 90s in their appropriations bill that they pass every year specifically states that ATF may not, that's again, may not use any of the funding that they receive to conduct federal firearms relief determinations. Last year, the House actually passed an appropriations bill that contained a provision for the first time which would have allowed it to occur, but then it was of course stripped out when it went to the Senate because they got their bill too late. I implore all of you to pick up the phone and demand that Congress appropriate money to conduct these determinations again. There's a number of people out there who are prohibited because they've been convicted of a non-violent offense. If federal firearms relief determinations were actually to begin again, a number of your fellow citizens could once again enjoy their Second Amendment rights. To make matters worse, ATF actually won't accept any money from an individual to fund their own determination. And that's probably the first time in the history of the government that they've said they would not accept money from someone. So basically, if you're prohibited, your options for relief are pretty slim. The GCA also amended the National Firearms Act, or NFA. This is where we get the term Title I and Title II firearms from. Title I being the Gun Control Act and firearms it regulates, and Title II being the amendments to the NFA and the firearms it regulates. Most notable of the amendments is the addition of destructive devices, or DDs, to the NFA. The GCA has undergone several amendments since its inception, including the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, which we're going to talk about next time, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993, and everybody's favorite, the Federal Assault Weapons Ban in 1994, which fortunately had a 10-year sunset provision. So what did the Gun Control Act of 1968 actually do? Well, it expanded the idea of who a prohibited person is, it re-implemented the licensing requirements which were found in the Federal Firearms Act for manufacturers, importers, dealers, and added a whole new category of collector, it granted the ability to obtain federal firearms relief, and it required manufacturers and importers to mark firearms with serial numbers, as well as amended the NFA to add destructive devices. Hopefully that gives you guys a broad overview of the history of the GCA and what it actually regulates. Keep in mind there's more to come as the GCA was actually amended after 1968 several times. In the next segment, I'll cover the Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986. If you guys like this episode, you know what to do. Hit that like button, share it around social media with your friends to help spread the knowledge. If you have a question you want answered on the show, do me a favor, let me know down in the comments below. Don't forget to like the Gun Collective on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Full30, Snapchat, and wherever else you can catch us on social media. And as always, thanks for watching.
The shirts worn in today's episode of The Legal Brief have been provided by Patriot Patch. Click the link in the description to learn more.